we've discussed that that's my salt, Mr. Mario.
Okie dokie.
Oh, you're gonna get me down. Great. Wait. Ah! Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't need those.
Yeah.
I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. Ah. Okay, Mexican candy. So funny. So funny. What's next? Tortillas. Oh. Oh. Thank you.
I'm tired.
Wait. Where am I? What's going on? What am I doing in here? Wait a second. Why am I being shipped? What's happening? Hello?
So long, Bowser.
Frittata!
You know, at this point, it should be pretty obvious Nintendo hates the user. They like the green that you bleed, but if they could have the green without your needs, oh boy, would they love that. I mean, then again, what corporation wouldn't? The whole end goal of all these companies is to get users that don't ask questions and just consume product until the next one comes around. That's just business 101. It's not exclusive to Nintendo. However, Nintendo definitely goes a step above what other companies are willing to do. Oftentimes, that comes from how protective they are of their own products. They are so protective to the point that, in their minds, you're not supposed to actually own the system. You're just supposed to play it and buy things on it. You want to tamper with it and turn it into your own personal device that you paid for? Think again, because Nintendo is restricting the Switch 2's USB port. Yeah, even the USB port on your Switch 2 is restricted access. You see, Nintendo doesn't want you using third-party docks or accessories that won't work, and that's thanks to proprietary protocols put in place. I know most of you are thinking to yourself, well, Frit, I'm not buying a Switch 2 to turn it into my own personal device. I want to buy a Switch 2 to have access to Nintendo's games and throw them money. I am okay with surrendering my consumer rights over if it means I get to finally play a Donkey Kong game or a Mario Kart game that took longer to come out than the truth about P. Diddy. And I'll say, you know, Nintendo guys are awfully patient and tolerant of this company. Then again, most people have been waiting an eternity for a new GTA, so if Nintendo keeps people waiting, what's the harm? You can play Mario Kart for 12 years before the next one. This news comes to us from the YouTube channel UFD Tech, who put out a short covering it, and thank God he kept it short because it's my job to stretch out the news, not his. Either way, let's see what Malcolm in the Middle's brother has to say.
Instead of just using normal USB details to transmit video signal and power, Nintendo decided to implement over 30 different proprietary signal handshakes with the Switch 2 that are there to make sure to ward off any unsanctioned docks. It's leading to major accessory makers having their devices be unreliable because they built theirs thinking the Red Luigi folks would use a sensible, common way of implementing the USB port. Currently, there's only one dock that's been tested and confirmed to imitate these Nintendo handshakes, but that's immediately at risk of not working if and when they decide to do a firmware update and block it out.
You know, a lot of people ask why. Why treat the customer this way? Why? Because fuck them, that's why.
Of course, Nintendo would do that, and it's obvious why. I mean, if you want to go and buy a Switch 2 dock, it's $120. $120 for cheap plastic with a little fan. So Nintendo has all the reason in the world, well, at least to themselves anyway, to ensure that third-party docks cannot touch tips with your Switch 2. You have any idea how much money they probably make off these things? It probably costs them no more than a bowl of ramen to manufacture these. That's how much they desperately want to lock you solely into their ecosystem, into their market. You see, USB-C is usually universal, and most people expect that, oh, if there's a USB-C port on this thing, I should be able to plug most things into it. Not if you have a Switch 2. If you have a Switch 2, the USB-C port on it is literally designed to solely work with whatever Nintendo has programmed, and it performs authentication checks to verify the legitimacy of whatever you're connecting to it. So if they don't approve of it, if you want to use something cheaper than the stupidly overpriced Switch 2 dock, you're not going to be able to, because that's just how greedy this fucking company is. They don't want cheap third-party accessories to exist at all. Accessory manufacturers claim Nintendo Switch 2 has encryption that break third-party docks. According to a report from The Verge, Nintendo Switch 2 has a new encryption scheme and some form of dedicated encryption chip, which has broken third-party docking. The console, of course, comes with its own dock. However, as The Verge points out, Nintendo has also broken compatibility with portable docks that you can take on vacation or to your hotel room, and with video glasses like the X-Real One. The site's report is based on what two accessory manufacturers claim. The USB-C PD traffic was also analyzed with the Power Z tester, which shows that Nintendo Switch 2 isn't acting the way it should. Attempting to use the console with a third-party dock or hub may refuse to negotiate power or bring about other issues. Switch 2 seems to talk in code that only Nintendo can decipher, whereas USB-C devices tend to operate on standardized set of instructions. All of this has led to a death of third-party docks for Nintendo Switch 2. JSOX, which was planning one for the system, has now paused its plans. One dock that does work, at least for now, is the Antec S3 Max, since it appears to speak Nintendo's language. Xreal actually intends to come out with a new Neo device later this year for docking. JSOX believes Nintendo could come out with firmware updates that could further impact third-party docks, though Antec says it could distribute firmware updates for its own dock. Personally, I would not take the risk of any third-party dock on your Switch 2. I mean, I would love if people did that to rub it in Nintendo's face, but it's not worth sacrificing your Switch 2 because when the Switch 1 released, there was a lot of compatibility issues because of Nintendo that resulted in some devices getting fried trying to use third-party docks. And believe me, it's all intentional. Like, Nintendo doesn't care what happens to your device. If you didn't buy or hand them money to do it their way, they see it as fair punishment, which is exactly why people's devices are being bricked. Now, I don't see any reports about using these devices leading to any bricking, and I highly doubt they will brick you for this because it doesn't involve anything illegal and it doesn't involve anything that could potentially lead to piracy, but it is unauthorized. And those that do work have only been able to do it because they bypass Nintendo's measures with a firmware update. Now, while it's not against the law, it still states in the EULA for Switch 2, bypass, modify, decrypt, defeat, tamper with, or otherwise circumvent any of the functions or protections of the console or the software, including through the use of any hardware or software that would cause the console or the software to operate with any unauthorized, illegal, or pirated software or hardware. And that's exactly what these manufacturers of third-party dock devices are doing. They are bypassing quote-unquote protections, and they are decrypting and modifying Nintendo's authentication process in order to even make it possible to somewhat work with your Switch 2. And I couldn't imagine that this loophole is going to last much longer. Mainly because The Verge can't keep their fucking mouths shut and are reporting what works after what firmware updates, and all of that info is locked behind a paywall, per usual, because it's The Verge. But once Nintendo catches wind of this, I'm pretty confident they are going to do another update that will make it even harder for third-party docks to exist. Hell, with how strict they're going, I wouldn't be surprised if they start to penalize people even more for trying to do this. Because right now, as far as I know, Nintendo's probably not even aware of it yet. And of course, these measures in place have made it a headache for people wanting to get third-party docks, because there's several reasons why you would want one. A, there's a lot of them that are cheaper, and B, there are docks that are far more portable and easier to take with you, so you don't have to bring the standard Switch dock. Because for some reason, billion-dollar Nintendo, with all their research and development at their expense, just can't come up with a more sufficient and portable and easy to carry portable dock for people who are constantly on the go traveling. Rather than embrace third-party options, it would seem they're putting measures in place to make third-party accessories more difficult to produce and less compatible, because a lot of these third-party docks that exist are having issues where they cannot output proper HDR in the 4K mode. Some are only able to get a charge and no actual output. Others are having severe latency issues, And basically every third-party dock that worked with the Switch 1 is not working with the Switch 2, and one can't help but feel it's all definitely done by Nintendo on purpose. Nintendo prides itself with consumer convenience, but not from third-party devices, which leads to that consumer convenience actually not being so convenient. Well, Fred, they're just looking out for the consumers. I mean, why do you think they put a fan in the Switch 2 dock? Because they know it needs to protect the Switch 2 from overheating, dumbass. No, the Switch 2 dock does not cool the console itself. That fan is to keep the internals of the dock cool. It serves a whole other purpose. Even then, cheap 3D printed plastic with a little cheap, shitty ATX fan is something most people can make and sell for far less than $120. You're not paying for safety measures. You're just paying more because it's a Nintendo branded dock. The truth is, a lot of these third-party manufacturers have figured out much more clever ways of creating devices that are more convenient for travel than what Nintendo has provided. And because Nintendo doesn't believe in competition, as we've seen with Pal World, they just go out of their way to make it harder for third-party manufacturers to create something that's a lot more appealing, efficient, and cost-effective. And who pays the price for that? Consumers. But luckily for you, I've been keeping up to date with this for a while, and for those of you that own a Switch 2, and you don't want to hand Nintendo $120 for an extra Switch 2 dock, which is absolutely absurd, considering how cheap the goddamn thing is to even make, I have an update that's actually somewhat good news, somewhat concerning, but information is information, and I want to make sure you have it, because any dollar you can save on overpriced plastic is what I'm here for. See, The Verge, God, I hate using them. I mean, the same people that put out one of the worst PC build guide videos that could have caused multiple fires across the country have experimented with some firmware updates that bypass what Nintendo has put in place. And the devices that they've gotten to function properly, somewhat, so far, include the AverMedia Elite Go GC313 Pro, AverMedia Core Go GC313 compact charger docks, the Elgato Facecam MK.2 webcam, and the Virtue Pro mobile dock. The firmware update should be pretty quick and easy to install. It's going to require a computer, of course. But personally, these aren't really devices I would go for because one of them is more expensive than the Switch 2 dock and one of them isn't that much cheaper. I think what most people are waiting for is the day a third-party device that will allow you to dock Switch 1, Switch 2, and the Steam Deck all at once, which is definitely in demand. Someone somewhere out there will eventually make it, but the problem comes with Nintendo's greediness. Nobody knows if Nintendo is going to update to block these accessories. Right now, the only way they work is by fooling the Switch 2 into thinking they're official. And that right there could cause Nintendo to potentially brick your device, as it does technically go against their EULA. And that is actually quite the concern. As of now, there's no update on that. We don't know how Nintendo is going to get along with these third-party manufacturers, but one begins to wonder, is it even worth buying a third-party accessory like this if, down the line, they release an update to outright block it and potentially brick your system, since it does violate their EULA? See, devices that are this universal, Nintendo treats as a threat. Hell no, we don't want people being able to use one dock for their Switch 1 and Switch 2, especially if it's cheaper than what we produce. Now you're probably wondering, oh Frit, will this go against anything the EU says? And I looked into it and unfortunately, technically no. You see, the EU has common charger rules, where all new devices sold in the EU must now support USB-C charging, which of course will reduce the number of chargers you need to buy and help minimize electronic every single time with you. Seriously, don't get a husky. This rule essentially makes it mandatory for any USB-C device to be able to be charged by a USB-C cable. But when it comes to outputting an image onto your display, this does not cover that. So if you're expecting any sort of lawsuits to start up from this, that may happen, but they could easily be shut down and not even considered. Third-party accessories with Nintendo devices in general are a coin toss. But in my opinion, they are worth it in order to not pay those ridiculous prices. But to think that they've basically lock the USB-C port on this console to only work with what they approve of is pretty ridiculous. In general, Nintendo's always looking for ways to not make the Switch 2 gaming experience cheaper, always looking to lock out options that afford the consumers cheaper alternatives and solutions, which is a case we're seeing with them and Amazon at the moment, but that's a different story for another time. If you're in the market for third-party Switch docks, now is not the time to shop, but better wait it out and see how Nintendo approaches this. They are greedy as fuck. Be on the lookout. Just like you should be on the lookout in your notifications box every time I upload. So like, comment, share, and subscribe if you so choose to. With that being said, I'll see you in the next video.
Fritongo sucks ass.